Welcome to a presentation by the Australian Delphi Users Group that was shown at our recent 2022 symposium. Before we start the actual presentation, I would like to go through a few things. Our forums provide a resource where you can ask questions and receive answers about Delphi. There are many experienced Delphi users who watch our forum and provide helpful answers to your questions. You can also show your knowledge by answering questions that others may have. Attendees of the symposium have access to a 2022 symposium category, which is where you will find information related to this year's symposium. This will include the videos, links, and content provided by the presenters. ADUG has regular local meetings in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, and Adelaide. Many of these meetings can be watched online via Zoom. Watch the meetings category in the forums for announcements of upcoming meetings, information you need to know to go to them, and what topics are going to be discussed at the meeting. I would like to encourage everyone who is able to attend our meetings to learn and network and meet up with other developers like you. We're always looking for people to present topics, and I'm sure there are many people watching who have unique expertise that others would be interested in knowing about. This year's presenters are Malcolm Groves, Ray Konopka, Alister Christie, and Stefan Glenke. We would like to thank our sponsors for supporting this year's symposium. This year, our major sponsor is Co-Partners, whom many already know as distributors of Delphi and Rad Studio. You will also know Malcolm Groves, who has been actively involved with ADUG for over 20 years. In recent times, Co-Partners have taken over and redeveloped Smart Inspect, an advanced .NET logging, Java logging, and Delphi logging tool for debugging and monitoring software applications. Co-Partners offer a range of products and services as well as Delphi and Rad Studio. A blog, Code Insight TV, and other resources are available from their website. In addition to sponsoring our symposium, Co-Partners is providing 2 Smart Inspect licenses for our prize draw. We thank Co-Partners for their ongoing support. We would also like to thank our prize donors who have provided us with excellent providers for attendees to win. Now, without further ado, here is one of our symposium presentations.
So my talk is on refactoring in Delphi, and I've got the subtitle, The Art of Code Despaghettification. So the spaghettification is sort of an astrophysical term related to being stretched out as you fall into a black hole. So I've kind of stolen it for this talk. But about me, so I'm an Embarcadero MVP, and I maintain the LearnDelphi.tv website. You're probably mostly already aware of that. And I've been programming in Delphi since version 3, but Turbo Pascal before that. So this is my current book, Code Faster in Delphi. And my new book, Code Better in Delphi, is due out anytime. I just need to spend some time finishing it. It's pretty close to completion. And I don't know if anyone's tried out newprofilepic.com, but that's kind of the sort of enhanced version of me. And yeah, so you find all about me at learndelphi.tv, but probably the best place to get in touch is LinkedIn. I find that's kind of easiest to keep track of conversations and things. So what is refactoring? So I'm just going to go through the points basically, but so improving code without changing the behavior. But it's not exactly that, because there are scripts that you follow to make the changes, which minimize the potential for making mistakes. So it's a systematic process, and you just go through sort of each step in the process to modify your code. And I've got this point here that you don't need to be able to understand the code. to make changes. And this is, I found this quite helpful many times when you've got some 1,000-line procedure that you have no idea what it does. And the comments don't necessarily relate to what the code does. And so you just start refactoring it and pulling out methods and trying to group things together. And then once you have an understanding of how it works, you can sort of throw that away and start refactoring it for posterity. So for what's going to be recorded in version control. But there are about 60 or 70 refactorings in the catalog, so refactoring.com/catalog. This is not, so it basically has a list and little diagrams and code snippets, but not the how to do the steps involved. So for that, you need to get the refactoring book or do a bit of Googling online, because there's lots of tutorials on doing refactoring. So each refactoring is a small change. So you might just be renaming a variable or reordering code and what have you. And a lot of the refactorings can be automated. So in the Delphi IDE, there is a number of refactorings that are available to modify code. And we're also going to look at Model Maker Code Explorer, which has some quite powerful refactorings as well. Most of the refactorings have a reverse. So for example, extract method, the reverse of that is inline method, and we're going to be looking at both of those a bit later. It really helps if you've got automated testing. Most of the projects I've worked on have been huge legacy applications with hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and not necessarily any automated testing, or if there's automated testing, it takes hours to execute. So yeah, not helpful there. But if you follow, in theory, if you follow the process, you shouldn't make any mistakes, but not always the case. And refactorings, you generally don't just do refactorings for the sake of it. Often there's an end goal in mind, and so you do a bunch of refactorings to make the process you want to achieve, adding a feature or removing a bug, easier to do. So in terms of the origin story of refactoring, apparently, from this information is from Wikipedia, but it was mentioned in an article in 1990. So refactoring has been around for 30 odd years, but people have been doing refactoring for far longer than that. So ever since code has been written, people have, refactoring has been done. And so it's sort of informally, I've read that people, the term factoring came from a process in Fortran for extracting a method. But if you're wanting to know, I don't know if you can see me in my video, but I'm holding a book. That's the refactoring book by Martin Fowler. So improving the design of existing code. And I've read the first edition about 3 times, and I'm going to be starting the second edition shortly. I've just finished Clean Agile by Robert C. Martin. I'd recommend any of his books, or look for him online on YouTube. He's got lots of videos and things. But regardless, the examples in the first edition are in Java, and in the second edition are JavaScript. And I haven't read the second edition yet, and I think the translation from JavaScript to Delphi is not as clean. So the Java is a lot more similar to Delphi. Now, there's a discussion of things called code smells, and these are patterns or anti-patterns, perhaps, in code that kind of are a source of refactorings. So you might have like a large method or something like that as a code smell. And for a large method, you might use extract method to break that down into smaller, more manageable bytes. But yeah, each code smell suggests a number of refactorings that you might want to try out. And so basically you can keep an eye out for these smells as you're modifying code. And so, bad code has code smells, and that leads to refactoring and hopefully better code. But as with anything, refactoring doesn't actually necessarily mean improving code. It just means changing code. So what can you do with refactoring? It's basically primarily about improving code, and I like to use it to improve readability. Readability is the key to maintaining large projects. And so if you're wanting more maintainable code, readability is a good first step, and lots of unit tests. And so yeah, and improving architecture is a bit more challenging because that's more of a long-term strategy. But certainly reducing complexity and reducing technical debt are great ways of using refactoring. So I've just got listed some basic refactorings here, but we'll be looking at some of these in detail. So our first refactoring we're going to look at is replace conditional with guard clause. So swap whoops over to code. Where's Delphi? Right at the end. Okay. So open my ADUG project. And so the first method in this, so this unit, this is actual production code that's being used. This unit is probably probably originally written about 20 years ago, and yeah, it gets modified from time to time, but this method probably hasn't been changed in 10 years, maybe 15 years. Now, so we're going to replace conditional with guard clause. So this is our condition. So if file exists, so if this is true, we execute all this code, and if it's not, we don't do anything. So what I'm going to do is, if not, then exit false. And then we don't need that, and don't need that. And we can reduce the indentation a little bit. So can everyone see the code sufficiently? I can up the font size a bit if necessary.
Okay.
It's good. Okay. So yeah, all we've done is reverse the condition on this if statement, and we're now exiting if it's not met. Now, in this little example, I personally think this is slightly improved because we've reduced the indentation and kind of grouped the code a little bit better, and probably not so noticeable in this example. But if you have a really large method, you won't be able to see the end of the method, and so if there's an else clause, you can throw that old, if I can spell, old else, throw it in there. And yeah, as I say, not such a big deal on this one, but quite often I've seen, methods that have if some condition, if some other condition, if some third condition, and then a huge block of code and hardly anything at the end. And it's like indented 3 steps. And if you can convert that to these guard clauses instead, it does make the code a lot easier to read and maintain. So we've simplified the logic a little bit and reduced indentation. I know some people don't like calling exit because it's altering the flow of the code. But my preference is to have these guard clauses where possible instead of big if statements. And quite often, just reducing the indentation as a goal is quite good. That often leads to more manageable code. So our next refactoring, introduce explaining variable. So I'm going to come down to about line 250 or so. And we have this if statement here. And this if statement requires an explanation. So we have a comment. So if we want to scale down only, and the image is smaller than the bounding box, don't scale it. So this is just for rescaling an image. Not that the code itself is particularly important, but what I'm going to do is go add a explaining variable. And I'm going to take this, put out there and throw a copy of that in there. And so we've basically just changed this if statement to if scale down only and images smaller than bounding box. So that comment can go. And just left with this little don't scale at all, which I can throw in here. So that's effectively introducing these explaining variables. And this is, I really like my if statements to read in English rather than as these, having to have a comment. It just makes the maintainability, so much better. Because also with a comment, often you don't know which part of the comment applies to which part of the if statement or the if clause. So that's the doing it manually, and I'm just going to declare some variables. So declare variable, it's a Boolean, because, which you'll see shortly, the refactorings in Delphi do not like inline variables. And this is a really big frustration of mine at the moment. Not that I'm doing a lot of coding, but I've come to quite like using inline variables because it does group things a bit more cleanly and makes manipulating the code a bit easier. But the refactorings in Delphi don't like them, which you'll see shortly. So I'm just going to come to this if new width is less than or equal to 0. No, sorry, this one, not equal to 0, because it's repeated twice. So we've got new width here and here. And so I can come up to the refactoring method and go introduce a variable. And Delphi takes a wee while to think about. This is the first time round. It's usually a lot faster second time round. And we get to use, give it a name, new width, not 0, if I can spell. Nope. And it's got this replace all occurrences. So I can do that. And we can see that we've got our explaining variable, and here it's been updated. Now, normally I would not, this is probably actually making the code more complicated to read, because this is quite obvious what the meaning of that is, and this adds no extra information. But it's a good example for this. Now, what I'll do is I will convert that to a inline variable, and if I try and repeat that process on new height not equal to 0. Introduce variable, we get this error because it's not liking this inline variable. So I've installed Model Maker Code Explorer, which we'll talk a bit more about shortly, but I can go add local variable and add explaining variable. Okay, and it is new height is not 0. I've done this before, so it's remembered the previous description, and a Boolean. And again, we can replace both occurrences. And again, that's created a local variable. So that's introduce explaining variable. And now I might, let's go to the refactoring catalog and go to introduce explaining variable. And we see it's got this, it's returning some calculation, which would probably need a comment to describe what it's actually doing. But if we look at the code here, instead, we are returning the base price minus quantity discount plus shipping, which we're using these 3 explaining variables. So that's a much more understandable way of expressing it. Yeah, much more readable. So we've replaced an expression with a local variable, and it's just basically to improve readability. And it's probably, you might lose a little bit of performance, but unless it's something that's being executed millions of times or billions of times, it's probably not an issue. And there's the refactoring in the IDE, which if you're a fan of inline variables, this is not going to work. And in fact, I think it's if you have an inline variable anywhere in the unit, it will likely fail. Or we can use the Model Maker Code Explorer option. And being able to replace multiple currencies is probably the only reason I'd use the automated version.
How are you? Well, I'm looking at the screen, and I've got 4 people up there. I see my name. I see Alister Christie.
John, can you switch off your mic? John Walker.
Thank you. Or yeah, doing it manually. And these days with inline variables, it's very fast to do a explaining variable manually, because you just go var and then the name of the variable you want. And there's a reverse refactoring as well, and that's inline variable or inline temp or inline temporary variable. So the automated refactorings in Delphi, there's quite a few in the menu, and it helps to memorize the keyboard shortcuts as well, but you don't get to see them if I'm using the keyboard. So I'll stick to the menu items. But typically, rename gets used a lot, extract method a lot. Declare variable, I used to use quite frequently, but now with inline variables, it's not necessary. We saw that briefly, declaring those 2 variables after I converting them from inline variables. And declare field if you're wanting to add a field to a record or class. And yeah, the IDE refactorings are quite broken now with inline variables. And if you don't use them, it's not a problem. If you're using a version of Delphi prior, I think 10.4 introduced inline variables, or maybe it was 10.3. It might have been 10.3 and 10.4 was the, I can't remember. I probably should have looked it up. So Model Maker Code Explorer. So you can get it, it's free. There's no reason why you shouldn't try it out. It has a huge amount of capability in terms of manipulating code and whole heap of keyboard shortcuts and stuff, not just refactoring. But we'll be looking at extract method, and we'll use edit entity quite a few times. And there's a huge amount of code manipulation stuff. I think we're using extract interface later, but we'll see. So our next example is the simple extract method. So extract method is, well, we'll just go ahead and do it. So back to Delphi, and for our simple example, I have another project. And this one, and the method we're interested in here is this print owing. And this is directly from the refactoring catalog. And I've just added a bit of extra code around it to make sure it compiles. And we have these, well, we have this comment. Now, comments are quite often an anti-pattern. If you've got a comment that's explaining the code, you probably should, rather than have a comment, you should express your code better so that the comment is redundant. And so in this case, we've got these 2 lines of code for printing details. So I can go And I might just replace that with print details. Now, if we look a bit closer, we've got these two variables, name and outstanding. Name is just a global variable, so we don't need to worry about it. But outstanding is local and we'll need to pass it in. So and I've just made it a double, probably should be a currency, but. And then we can quite happily just shift those into here. And so now we've eliminated the comment. And we've now got some code that expresses that comment. So I'm working with large legacy projects that are sort of 20-something years old. There ends up, if the code maintenance is not as good as it should be, the comments often end up not representing what the code does. And that's just really annoying, because you're going through version control and then looking at tickets and trying to work out what is the comment the correct thing or the code. But if you can eliminate comments, then they don't need to be maintained. So you don't end up with this disparity between what the code does and what the comments say the code should be doing. But let's undo that, because that was quite a bit of typing, and you can tell by the number of times I need to press Control-Z to there we go. So instead, I'll just highlight this and go refactor, extract method, print details. So we've now done exactly the same thing. It's picked up that we needed to pass in that local variable. That comment, of course, is now redundant. And it's effectively the same as before. If I undo that, that required a lot less undos. If instead I do that and eliminate that, and we go, let's try again. Extract method no longer available, so it isn't even an option. So instead, we can go to Model Maker Code Explorer and extract method. Call it print details, and we notice that it hasn't picked up the parameter because Model Maker Code Explorer also does not support inline variables very well. But I can call it outstanding, and it's remembered from previously. And I think that's what I need to do. Okay. And I should have removed the code instead of leaving it. And of course, the comments no longer required. So that's kind of about as simple as extract method goes. We'll be looking at much more complicated examples later. Oh, excellent. I find it really annoying how Delphi does this occasionally. There we go. Okay, so we found a comment in the code that was just commenting a block of code, and we replaced that comment by using extract method. So it's fairly straightforward, and that's really common. How to sort of find places to use extract method, assuming that the comments are okay and that there are actually comments. Not always the case. And we just use the hint of the comment as a hint from the method name. And of course, we did it 3 different ways. We did it manually, which involves a lot of typing. Used the Delphi IDE refactoring and the one in Model Maker Code Explorer. So we've got the 3 options. Manually, lots of typing. It's slow, prone to error, but you've got the most flexibility. So you can pretty much, like if you wanted to return the refactorings, Model Maker Code Explorer can be a function, return something, but I haven't really played around with it enough. I've only just started using it because of the refactorings in the IDE are quite broken. And using the IDE refactoring, refactoring. It's both IDE and Multimaker Code Explorer. It's much faster, much less typing. You're less likely to introduce errors. The refactoring the IDE is very stable. At least it used to be. If it works really well. But it's often not available if you've got any inline variables anywhere. And it works really well with detecting parameters and what local variables you need in the new method. It's like some previous versions, sort of some of the XE versions of Delphi. I had noticed it missing parameters and local variables occasionally, but yeah, lately it's been pretty good. It also works project-wide. So if you're doing a rename, it will, if you rename a public method, it will search the entire project for where that method is used and update all those instances, which is really handy. And it works with forms. So if you want to rename data module, convert from data module 1 to something more meaningful, it will rename everything in the project, including the DFM file itself, which is super handy. Or if you want to rename an event or something like that. Multimaker Code Explorer, there seems to be fewer constraints on the code you can refactor. It has a lot more options, but more likely to require fixing the code up after it's been performed. And it's not project-wide. So only, I think most of the tools only work within the current unit. So now we're going to have a look at some more advanced method extraction. And for that, I'm going to go to another unit, except it's in this project. So I might have forgot to mention this is a real estate application. Go to this form here. This is to display details about a listing property. And on this tab, there is this button for downloading photos or downloading from realestate.co. So effectively, it goes and scrapes the realestate.co.nz website and downloads all the photos and updates data accordingly. And so what we're going to do is have a look at this. And we can see if we have a look through it, it's quite long, and it's broken down into a number of areas. So there's this kind of setup of, are you sure you want to overwrite this listing kind of thing? And there's a whole bunch of data modification. And then there's where it downloads the photos. And then basically we're tidying up at the end. And we also see there's some of this code that's been commented out, and this is something really common. So I've not changed this project at all for the purposes of this talk. And some of this unit is at least 10 years old with this code. It's been updated a few times in the interim to reflect some basic changes. But we can eliminate this sort of commented out code. It's go there and then that, and so this is immediately slightly easier to read and work out what's going on. That code is in that old code is in version control. There's no need to have a record of it. The only reason to have commented out code if there's something that helps with debugging. That's generally the only thing I leave in these days. Otherwise, just rely on version control for recovering any old code. The next thing is there's a lot of code here in this event. These days, I do not like having much code in events. I try to minimize just to a few lines of code, but more sort of something more like that. But so what I'll start by doing is renaming this to download from Rico. So Rico, short for realestate.co.nz, and call that method from here. And then I'm just going to press Control-Shift-C on the keyboard to declare that in the interface. So there it is there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this to a class method. And then effectively, we get a number of errors. And this gives you an indication of how closely this method is tied to the class. So we see that this save listings data is a method on the class. Ref is a function, as it's listed there as well. And we scroll down and we see that none of the code in the data modification references the form or the class directly. But we've got this ref here and refresh dbpix. So there's 5 instances where this method talks to the form. And so I'm just going to undo that, but I'm going to do a shortcut. I'm just going to Control-Shift-E on the keyboard, which is a Model Maker Code Explorer shortcut. If I can find it there, edit entity, and just untick class method. And that should make all our errors go away. So that's now a regular method. So what we're going to do is we are going to take this chunk of data manipulation code, and I could do, if extract method was available, I'd use that, but it's not. So I'll do extract method here. And I'm just going to, for now, prefix the our new method with the original method's name. And I'm going to make it a class method. And I am going to remove the old code and go, OK. So we see we've now got a bunch of errors. And that's our new method. Our old method, come down, we see there's the set being called there. But we see that this class here is not being recognized. So it's being declared somewhere down here. If I can spot it, there's quite a few. Here we go. It's declared here. So I'm just going to cut that and chuck it up in our uses in here. And I like to have 1 line per unit. So I'm just going to highlight that and go Control-D on the keyboard, which is reformat. And it's just shifted those to be 1 line. Now, Model Maker Code Explorer adds a number of bookmarks, 7, 8, and 9. So if I go Control-7 on the keyboard, it takes us to, so 7 and 8 are basically where our original code was. And if I go Control-9, this is our new extracted method. And so that's all great. That worked. Oops. All straightforward, no problems. And we're going to repeat this with the getting of photos. So I could do this whole block here, but what I'm going to do is just grab the internals of this here. And you'll notice that I'm missing some try-finalies as well. So I'm creating these images, these string lists, and freeing them with no try-finally, which is a little bit bad, but we won't worry about that for now. So I can come up and repeat the process, extract method. And I'm also going to make it a class method. But it is going to fail because we are using ref here and the refresh dbpix, which belong to the class. So, and remove the old code. So we can see we've got our 2 errors. So refresh dbpix is happening at the end. So what I'm going to do is just going to take that out and put it after our method call. And for ref, there's a number of ways we can solve this. What I might do, what I will do initially, is I'm going to add another parameter called ref, and it's a string. It's remembered from previously, so it's a string and a const, and I can go, okay. So that removes that error, but now we've got not enough parameters. And I can just add that in like that. So that was pretty straightforward. But if I control click on ref, we see it's just a function returning a string, and it's so this is the DM is a data module, and it's actually a function which is shorthand for this longer winded data module name. So I've done this in a few units to make the code a little bit easier to follow. So I'm just going to take this bit of code and go Control 9. Yep, Control 9 to go to this bookmark. And where it's got ref, I'm just going to replace it with what ref. So this is the reverse of extract method. It's called inline method. And so I'm just including the contents of that method in here. And then, of course, I don't need that parameter anymore. And I can go to that error and remove that like so. So that's extract method. And we did that twice. So let's come back to our slides. So we started with, I know what I forgot to do. Let's recompile that. And there'll be a number of warnings. Which I might just rearrange. So we've got a whole heap of warnings, which is related to these local variables not being removed. The refactor, the extract method in the IDE does a really good job of removing the old local variables that aren't used anymore. So we can get rid of those ones, I think, having done this about practice this talk about half a dozen times previously. So we've now just got this historical typecasting warning. Okay, back to our slides. So yeah, we started with a large complicated method, and now it almost fits on a screen. It's stiff. In fact, so normally this is a 4K screen, so this would have a lot more space for the code, but for the purposes of bandwidth, I'm doing this at 1080p. Excuse me. So we started with a large complicated method, and we sort of worked out how that code is divided up, and found some logical divisions where we could then use extract method to make that original method a lot shorter, and hiding a lot of the complexity. And so those new blocks of code became new methods, and so the complexity of, so we've now got 3 methods where we had 1, and if you add up the complexity of those 3 methods, it's generally less than the big method, because the complexity of a method, or just code in general, increases faster than linearly. So a method that's twice as long is generally more than twice as complicated. And then partly that's just because you can't see the whole method on the screen. You have to scroll around a lot, and there's only so much information you can keep in your head at any one time. And if you can break down that large method into smaller methods, that large method becomes, you get some of the concepts are removed from that into a single line, which makes things a lot easier to understand. So our next refactoring is move method. So if we come back to our code and have a look at our, in fact, I'm just going to highlight these and go Control D, so they're on one line. Now, update data, it's a class method, so it's effectively completely unrelated to this class. But it references the data module a lot. So if I control click on that and then control click on the data module, this is the data module. And what we're going to do is shift that method to here. So if we come back to listing inquiry and have a look at our class method signature, I'm just going to copy that and paste it. And I'm not going to make it a class method in this instance. And I'll press Control-Shift-C to give us a very basic implementation. And we see that we're missing the unit for our downloader. Let's go there. So our next step, if I come back to listing inquiry, is to come down to the implementation here, and I'm just going to go begin end, call the new method, and pass in the required parameter, and then just take all of this, cut it, and paste it. And we see we get quite a few errors, but that is because we're now referencing the data module from within the data module with this sort of shortcut that doesn't exist here. So I'm just going to highlight all this code and go Control R for replace. We're going to replace all the DMs in the selected text and go replace all, and all our errors have magically disappeared. So that was a fairly straightforward shift method. And, well, we might say, well, that was one method done. Why not we do this this method as well? And normally, in this instance, I mean, that was quite logical shifting the other one, but this one doesn't really refer to the data module very much. It does in this one instance. But the big problem is this multi-threaded downloader. So this is a VCL form, which here's a list of photos to download, photos being downloaded, and whether they were successful or not. And I really don't want the form being referenced from within the data module. That really gets my skin crawling, because that data module, we could use that in a FireMonkey application potentially. That you might be able to make that work under Windows, but certainly under Android, it's just the compiling is just going to fail. So we really don't want to have this form referenced from our data module. And if this was, and then I think this is probably a Windows only application, but I might do it initially just to get things working, but we can take some steps beforehand. So first, let's go back to our slides before we get, so we effectively, we don't want to move that method yet. So what we did on our, the original method we shifted, we had a method that really belonged to another class, and it was looking, most of that method was looking at the other class, and that's a code smell referred to as inappropriate intimacy. and it's basically looking at the internals of a class. I think it's going kind of one class looking at the privates of another. If you kind of think of it that way. So yeah, so the contents of the updating data was more related to the data module than it was to the form. So we decided we'd shift it. Oh, I have forgotten one thing, and I've done this several times in my tests, and that is the final step. And so we've still got this method, the update data method, on not the data module, but the so if we come up here. So we've got our update data, which is just calling the code from the data module. So our last step is to remove this one. So remove that and that, and then call the new method. So it becomes dm dot. So we created the new method, we shifted the contents, and we pointed the old method at the new method. And at this point, this is kind of the minimum you can do before you can actually test the new changes. So at this point, we'd compile, and if you had unit tests, you'd be able to run all those. And you might need to make some changes because you've shifted the method around. But that's probably all good. But in this case, not enough unit tests. I'd have to run the application and test that it all still works. But I'm pretty confident it does at this stage because I've done it about 6 or 7 times. And then with all the new method. So in this case, we are only calling the method from one location, but it might be the case that this method might be used throughout your application. And if it's a library method, it could be called hundreds of times potentially. And so you might need to do some so global switch and replace or some regular expressions or something like that to, or even just do it manually, call the new method instead of using the old method. And then you can delete the old method. You might do it around the other way. You might delete the old method and that try and compile, and that will give you an indication as to where to remove the old method call. So our next refactoring, so extract interface and inject dependency. We've now got this method that we want to shift our download photos from realestate.co, but it's got this form in it, which we don't want. We don't want that form in the data module. So what we want to do is somehow still call this with get files, but have no reference to the form. So we could particularly do this with passing in an anonymous method or something like that. But what we're going to do is extracting an interface. So if I come down to, or come back to our form that we don't want to reference, and go view model maker code explorer, I'll shuffle this to the side for now. We can see that we've got 2 methods, webGetFile and webGetFiles. So this is the method that we're calling, but we might as well shift both of them. So I'm just going to highlight them both, right click and go to refactorings and then extract interface. So we want to call our new interface multi-threaded downloader interface, and we'll give it a GUID and go okay. And so I can close that now, and we now have an interface. And I'll just go Control D on that with webGetFile and webGetFiles on it. Now, what I want to do is shift this to above here, and I can say that this form implements this interface. And we see we've got an error here. For some reason, it's so the system classes here and classes here. Sometimes when I've done this, it hasn't done it, and other times it's included it. So I'll just remove that and I'll get rid of that warning. So far so good. We now want to shift this interface into a new unit. So I can go File, New Unit, and rename it. Oops. Multi-threaded downloader interface. And come back to our form. Extract that out from there, cut it from there, and paste it in. We've got an error. We're missing strings. That's in system.classes. So that gets rid of the error here. I wanted to actually call that multi-threaded downloader. Okay, so that was a simple rename refactoring, but currently it's not declared. So I'm just going to copy and paste that unit in there somewhere, and that's gotten rid of our errors. We could at this point compile it and verify that we've got. Ideally, we'd have no warnings, but there's still quite a few in this project. I think the project's probably about 200,000 lines of code, maybe 250,000, something around on that order, plus 70 million lines of third-party library code. Anyhow, we've now got an interface on this form. We'll come back to the listing inquiry and add our unit to the top here. Oops, Control 8. So there's our get photos method and the implementation for it. So I'm going to add a new parameter to this, pressing Control Shift E, which is the edit entity shortcut for the Model Make Explorer. We add a new parameter. I'm going to call it multi-threaded downloader, and I've done this before. Declare it const, because ideally interfaces should either be var or const, to cut down on the reference counting. It's all good. So we've got our new parameter. And mtd call the webget files from our off on our interface, and I'm going to cut that. Yep, it's called multi-threaded downloader. Okay, and we go back to where we called it. Just Control 8 on the keyboard. It's a shortcut. Oops, and pass that in like so. So at this point, this should happily compile. It'd be, a good opportunity to test and everything, make sure everything is working. But I'll skip that for brevity for now. Now, a couple of things I need to point out is that I'm not calling free, because if we have a look at the onClose event, we see that the form is freeing itself. So I don't need to worry about that. And the other objection you might have is that we're passing in an object as a interface, and that might trigger reference counting. I'm actually not sure if it will in this case, because I've passed as const, but if potentially, if you pass in an object as an interface reference, that object will get freed. So there could be a potential double free issue here, but the way forms, in fact, I think T-persistent in general implement add ref and release. Well, in fact, they effectively don't. So I think release always returns -1, so that effectively the life cycle of the form is managed by the application, not by an interface, if that makes sense. But suffice to say, it works. In fact, I could, if I was being a little bit more aggressive, I could just pass that in there, like so. But I like to have the variable there. It just makes for easier debugging, because I can set a breakpoint there and make sure that I have actually got something, what I wanted in here. Not such a big deal for creating a form, but anyhow. So our get photos no longer depends on a form. So we've removed that dependency. So at this point, what I can do is come up here, and I might just go Control V on that to make it one line. Normally, as I said, I normally run on a 4K screen, and I can have easily 200 columns or something like that. I think I set my default wrapping at about 120, 160, something like that. So, and I copy that, chuck that on our data module, and again, I have removing the class, no longer make the class method. Control-Shift-C to declare that, and we see that we're missing, the multi-threaded downloader unit interface, and because I haven't saved it, it doesn't come up in the class completion. So I'm just going to grab one of these and add interface on the end. So that's all our errors gone. I can come down here to its implementation, and we do the same thing. Same thing as before. So I go begin end, get photos, and cut all of that and check it on the data module. We've got a couple of other errors. In this case, we can remove the DM, and we need to add another unit, which I happen to know is high processing cross-platform. So that's all now nice and happy. Come back to our listing inquiry, would compile, test, and all that kind of thing. But I'm pretty confident that this works. Delete that. Delete that. And all the method from our data module. So that's so effectively we wanted to achieve the shift method, but we had that form that we didn't want. So we had to do these two other refactorings first. So we extracted an interface, and we injected that interface into the method. So this is, if you're familiar with the solid principles of object-oriented programming, termed by, or sort of created by Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob, sort of 20-something years ago. The D in solid is for the dependency inversion principle, which is what effectively we've done. So we took our form. We did not want that form being referenced from the data module, because we lose all our cross-platform compatibility and what have you. And instead, we extracted an interface from that form. We put that interface in a new unit, and then we had both the data module and the form point to that interface. So that the form implemented the interface, and the data module used it. And we then used dependency injection or method injection to make that method not reference that form anymore. And so now both the data module and form depend on the interface and not each other. And this is this is exactly the dependency inversion principle at work. And it is a fantastic way of breaking up your breaking dependencies in code, and allows you to much more easily manage code. So those two, the data module and form, now have no references between them. They can be modified. They have compilation independence. They can be compiled independently. So you could, do things and shift them into packages and things like that much more easily if you're so inclined. So we're now at the end of my talk. As I said before, if you're wanting to know more about refactorings, we've covered half a dozen in this talk, so about 1/10 of the refactorings that are available. But they're sort of some of the most common. But I can't recommend this book enough. It's amazing if you're wanting to be able to modify code in a safe manner. Refactoring.com is a good place to go to kind of get a handle on a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't have the scripts, the steps you need to go through. And I probably didn't illustrate them well enough in this talk, but it's because I'm so used to doing them. Actually, let's take a quick digression and actually run this. And see it in action. Should work out what that is, but anyway. So it's listing inquiry on the internet tab. And we see we've got an ID for the listing on realestate.co. And I can go download. And it's updating the data and downloading the photos. And we can see we've got the photos that might be downloaded. But anyway, so everything still works after all that. The other book I'd recommend, particularly if you're working with a legacy application, is this Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. And the title of this book could equally well be Refactoring to Tests. So it's very much about taking code, breaking it down so that you can start introducing tests and get effective unit testing for your sort of large, horrible legacy application code. You might have great code in your applications, but some of the things that I've worked on are not great. Even this real estate application, which I've been working on off and on for 20-something years. Some of the early code, some of the code in that is more than 20 years old. So not necessarily the best. And a lot of this, the content for this talk has come from my new book, which is not out yet, Code Better in Delphi. I still have some sections to write and a lot of proofreading to do. So I'll get quite a number of people to proofread that. And if you go to this URL, you can get the notes, the section out of the book. So the refactoring chapter from this book. And that covers a number of refactorings. It doesn't cover extract interface or probably a few others, a few other little minor ones. Probably not the introduce, add variable, create variable. But yeah, it also covers extract method object. which is similar to the extract method, but basically you convert a single method into a class of its own, and then it makes it a lot easier to break down that class. So I think we're probably now at the Q&A section. I don't know how we want to arrange this. Do people just want to unmute themselves if they've got a question? I covered a lot in this talk. So I think I've done it several times. It's about an hour long, and I might be getting shorter by talking faster. We'll see. So how do people find that? Could people follow?
Yeah, I really thought that was great, and I bought the Code Better in Delphi book when it first came out and found it was really good. Yep. I've been recommending it to the Perth group for quite a while, so yeah, get the book. Yeah,
it's sort of that's it. It's kind of a lot of the it's mostly about being more productive in Delphi. So a lot of shortcuts. So I mean, the first thing I talk about is, if you touch typing, if you can't touch type, then you should learn. If you can, then get faster, because you basically type, coding is just huge amounts of typing, and the faster you can type, the more code you can write in a shorter space of time. And then learning keyboard shortcuts for the IDE, and using various plugins and third-party tools to make your life easier. There's things like metaprogramming, so writing code to modify code is quite handy. Regular expressions, and also knowing the Delphi runtime library can save you, reinventing the wheel and a lot of typing. So there's a lot in that book. I believe in one of the emails that said you could get a copy of the physical book for $20. Well, the Code Better in Delphi, but it's actually the Code Faster. The Code Better is not available, although I might have a talk with the organizers about if people want an electronic version. If you've already got the book.
Can you explain what your next book is about?
So Code Better in Delphi is about writing better code. So for instance, refactoring. So refactoring is an excellent way of improving existing code. And there's a lot about sort of coding practices, how you should name your variables and things like that. And using tools such as Pascal Expert, or what's that? What's the Fix Insight by TMS. These are just fantastic tools for if you run them on a legacy application, you'll get tens of thousands of potential hints as to what you can improve, ranging from not passing a string as const var, not as const, but which that's kind of a trivial thing, but you might be missing try-finally statements. There might be instances where you're not actually freeing things, so memory leaks and what have you. FastMM, if you've FastMM 4 or 5, if you want to take advantage of detecting memory leaks, there's a fantastic tool with it. Adding that just the report memory leaks on shutdown equals true as your first line of code, and using the full FastMM as well, because it'll actually give you the line of code where memory leaks are occurring.
Alister, my question was about your next book. Can you give us some insights on?
In fact, why don't I just, my screen is still being shared, so so from the recording, you might be able to reconstruct the book. So in terms of the table of contents, a lot of stuff about making code maintainable. The maintainability, basically, you write code once, but you could be reading it. You might read it hundreds of times or even 1,000 times more. So if you've got code that lasts literally for decades, and I've written code that is decades old, how often do you go back and read that? It might be once, it might be never, but some of that code you might reread hundreds of times, and or even 1,000 times. And if you it takes a similar amount of time to understand it as to write it originally, the cost of maintaining that code just so completely outdwarfs or out, the original code that you wrote, the amount of time that in maintaining that code is the writing of it is nothing compared to the maintaining of it. So you should, as much as possible, write your code for maintainability. And if it takes you twice as long or 3 times as long to write good code, and it should take you basically the same amount of time, then it's well worth it. So yeah, maintaining code. So let's have a look. So small coding tips. So yeah, comments. Yeah, side effects and functions. Yeah, is free and nil a good idea? So dry. Don't repeat yourself. Solid. The single. Well, so the various single responsibility principle, open closed, Liskov substitution principle. So if you violate that, then you're basically you're not taking advantage of object-oriented code because your code is not properly polymorphic. Interface segregation, and of course we discussed dependency inversion, and so on. So there's the chapter on refactoring, which you'll be able to download. Some design patterns. So a lot of the stuff in here is introductory stuff. So I only talk a little bit about design patterns because if you want to know a lot about design patterns, you should get Primoj's book, something design patterns in Delphi, hands-on design patterns in Delphi, I think it's called, which is available from Peck Publishing. So if you want to know more about that, and also, yeah, there's quite a few good books on patterns and practices these days. So Nick Hodges' books, Coding in Delphi, More Coding in Delphi, and Dependency Injection in Delphi. So I do talk a little bit about dependency injection in here. Test-driven development. So I've got the Bolden Carter, as well as some stuff on test insight. You should really be using that if you want to do have any kind of, whether you're writing tests first or after. Test insight is a tool you should be using. A section on debugging, and I've been debating about whether to include that or not, because if you're writing good code, basically if you're using the debugger a lot, there is something wrong. Your code should be better. But yeah, removing dependencies. So cleaning up uses is good, because for only if it makes your application faster to compile. And not such a big deal anymore, but if you had the experience of the code insight, in Delphi pausing for a long time, it's probably because you've got too many units in your uses, because it's got the IDE had to parse all of that, but that's now done in a separate process, which is a big improvement, despite the fact that it's now only just kind of working properly, the sort of IDE insight. So yeah, a logging example. This settings example is, I might need to make that. It's hugely common. I think I had some comments on Code Faster in Delphi that the examples weren't complicated enough, and this will definitely satisfy those people. So talk about version control. Yeah, if you're not using version control, you're insane. And unfortunately, I'm talking most about subversion because that's what I have the most familiarity with. I do use Git a bit, but pretty much if you're starting from scratch, you should probably be using Git. It's pretty much the version control these days, even though subversion is a lot easier to understand and think about. And yeah, there's a lot more. A lot of the concepts in Git a little bit more complicated, but massively more flexible. So the main thing about Git is that it makes branching effortless and basically never goes wrong. Whereas with subversion, branching it always makes me nervous. So and it's slow. So to go between different branches can take quite a while, whereas with Git it's more or less instant. So working in teams, waterfall, don't do it. Discussion about agile and various other things, and yeah, what you should be doing in various instances. So that's kind of the contents. It's bigger. It's now, so Code Faster was about 160 pages. I'm up to over 200, and I've done no layout as yet. So it'll probably get longer just for the fact that trying to have sort of things proportional on each page. And so I've got, there's lots. There's probably not a lot more to write, but it's kind of down to really hard stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's people just want to have questions or just have a random question to get some discussion going.
I have a question, Alister.
Yeah, go ahead, right.
Is there a way to extract local procedures into methods?
No, local procedures are bad.
No, I want to extract them.
Yeah, they're not well supported by the. In fact, really, I think the compiler. I've heard it mentioned a number of times by people who've worked on the compiler that local methods are more of a hack, and you should really avoid them. They're not supported as anonymous methods. That's a good example. Good reason not to use them. But basically, just copy and paste them, and make them a method on the class rather than the procedure itself. If it's just a procedure, then convert that procedure to a class, and then all those local methods then become methods on the class, and that's a fairly easy way of sort of refactoring those out. But yeah, I've said working on methods, procedures that are thousands of lines long, and they have dozens of local methods. It is really a nightmare to tidy up that code. It's just from a standpoint of understanding it, and then but in that case I'd use extract method object. I think I'm not sure if it's still called that, because a lot of these have been renamed.
Rightio. It's time for the break now.
Okay.
So
one point, if I can. I'm hoping this is a good point for Alister and not some sort of a pain point. Embarcadero gives us his PDF book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a current Delphi license, in fact, probably till the end of the year, you should be able to get a PDF version of the book for free. There's been kind of some restrictions on that. You might have had to have attended a webinar or something like that to get it, but it might be in your download section, in my downloads, in wherever that is these days.
Just one quick final plug. So Alister did mention we've got a bunch of the printed copies, so you can get a physical copy delivered for $20. Personally, I've got 2 copies. So I've got 1 copy at home and I've got 1 copy in the office, just because the Code Faster book is just such an awesome reference just to grab and use. Mine's madly dog-eared because I hate PDF, because they're great to conveniently open, but mate, I just love dog-earing and using the book. So I've got 2 copies, 1 at both ends. So yeah, if you're in Melbourne, grab your copy today. But otherwise, if you want a copy, someone at some stage will tell you how to order it, or email the committee. So it's absolutely awesome. Get 2 copies, get 3, get 4, keep 1 in the car, 1 on the bike.
I should also point out, say thanks to Shane, because he's been quite helpful in terms of some of the organization of the book. Originally, it was going to be 1 book combined together, and Shane suggested a trilogy, but at the time I couldn't think of a third title. But Jim McKeith suggested Code Securely in Delphi would be a good third. And there's a lot of potential topics in that, but but I think that'll be even more challenging to write than Code Better. but yeah, so yeah, if you can get the PDF version, if you haven't got it, I'd highly recommend it, because it's just, it's free. And yeah, the code beta is probably going to be out in a few months' time. I was hoping to have it done by now, but yeah, life gets in the way.
For anybody out there that doesn't know me, Lachlan and I are the continuity group. I began reselling Delphi in 2003. And in 2013, I became aware of developers and organizations with a need to support their Delphi projects in the short and long term, but they had difficulty finding the available expertise to provide that required support. So in 2013, I established the continuity group to provide that support. Our greatest challenge has always been to match customer needs with available developers that within the customer's time frame. So if you have a project that needs some support, you can contact Lachlan or myself, or if you have some time available and would be interested in joining our team, please contact Lachlan or myself. Lachlan, would you like to add anything to that?
No, just that sort of, I guess, guys, if you've just got some capacity, it doesn't need to be full capacity in some of it. Maybe you're working 3 days a week and you've got two days available. People who we're working with, a lot of them have their own projects as well. So it's an opportunity to pick up some work, but without sort of being fully responsible for a whole major project. Yeah, a lot of the people we work with, the developers we're working with are solo developers, and they're actually sort of quite enjoying working as part of a team. So that's an opportunity there to work with others as well. So yeah, if you've got some spare time, or if you've got a project that you're not sure what's going to happen in the future with it, get in touch with us and we'll do our best to help you. But other than that, I guess, enjoy your lunch.
Yeah, I'll just pipe in and say that, yeah, if you don't have some sort of, I suppose, continuity for if you, get hit by a bus or something like that, you're doing your users a disservice. You need to have some mechanism whereby someone can take over your project and what have you.
Prefer the win the lottery option to get hit by a bus.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you mean if you win the lottery, you can hand the project over to someone, but if you get hit by a bus, you need to have that set up in advance, which you should definitely have that process in place. So yeah, so definitely, yeah, if you've got if you're a lone developer working on a project, you definitely need to talk to the T continuity group.
Yeah, and
actually, in my new book, I mentioned you briefly as a how you really every project. I talk about the bus number, which is the minimum number of people who you can get hit by a bus and your project can continue. And if it's one, then you need another some sort of external party to be able to maintain your application.
Yeah, and also we're not necessarily talking about necessarily taking over your source code from day one or anything like that. We've got a process where we can basically, it's about cracking open your head, extracting the knowledge and getting it in a format where someone else, maybe us, maybe someone else completely can come along and pick up the project. And that's our Knowledge Arc product, which is sort of a series of basically interviews over Zoom or something similar, which we record, categorize, and build up an archive that someone else in the future can get a head start with your project if they needed to.
Just to confirm, back up what Alister said, I am just doing a quote at the moment, and it's into a hospital, and I'm up against the big medical companies. And the number one concern is what happens to me. And so as part of that quoting process is me saying, wait a minute, I've got this process in place. And then the other critical bit from my point of view is I want to sell my business in 3 years' time. I don't want the future buyer saying, wait a minute, we can't buy this company because you're the only developer. So from those two reasons alone, what happens to my customers helps me win contracts, but it also then helps me having a company that I can sell. They're two great reasons to be talking to the continuity group.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Alister. Thanks, Shane.
guys.